Oh, there we go. Good morning again. My name is Yen Tu. I'm the Vice President for the CPA, and welcome to the January 27th CPA meeting. The CPA has provided the opportunity for the public to participate via the WebEx platform. When we take public comments, we will begin by taking public comment from those individuals attending the meeting at the Sacramento location. I will then ask the moderator to open up the line for public comment. You will be allotted up to 5 minutes for public comment. And I also would like to note that we have CPA President Salazar and CPA member Jacobson will be participating remotely, and there are no member of the public at their locations. Ms. Reed, can you call the roll?
Nancy Corrigan. Nancy Corrigan, present. Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Present.
Dan Jacobson.
Here.
Christian Lotta.
Present.
Dee Dee Owens.
Present.
Joe Rosenbaum.
Present.
Katrina Salazar.
Katrina Salazar, present.
Michael Savoy.
Present.
Yen Tu.
Present.
And Evangeline Ward.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. All right, we're going directly to the agenda. Agenda 5, public comment for items not on the agenda. Any board member, public comment from here? Ms. Moderator, can you open for WebEx?
Certainly, and if anyone has any comment for an item not on the agenda, we're using the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. You can look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen. Once that opens, you'll see a text box, type the word comment and click send. And other users from the public, if you are a call-in user, you may raise your hand by pressing *3, or anyone may raise their hand by clicking on the hand icon. People will have 5 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, item number, report from the president. I have a few things to report. The first one would be the leadership roundtable meeting regarding California Board of Accountancy activity for 2023. We had the meeting on Wednesday, January 25th. The meeting provided our leadership with an opportunity to meet with Acting Executive Officer Dominic Vanzini and his executive team. During the meeting, we reviewed the plan meeting topics for 2023. We spent a significant amount of time discussing priority projects for 2023. A few of those priority projects include preparing the CPA Sunset Review Report, which will be submitted to the legislators at the end of the year. Another project relating to the education requirement for licensure. This project will look at the educational requirement themselves, efficiencies that can be made in how staff review college transcripts, and possible ways to assist students who are in or are considering entering the pipeline and a better understanding and increased confidence that they know what the education requirements are and how to meet them. We will also be working on the committee members pipeline, and we anticipate engaging all members for their assistance in sharing these volunteer opportunities so we can fill current and future vacancies. We also think our focus on communication and outreach needs to continue. The leadership team support this great work and expanding our reach and messages. As you can recall, we did a lot of communication last year, and we would like to continue that. We will hear more about these activities later today during the review of the 2023 Communication and Outreach Plan. One of the big focus will be the CPA evolution and the transition to the new uniform CPA examination that will occur in a year from now. We touch on the importance of continuing the business modernization project and discussing fee level changes to ensure a healthy fiscal foundation. We have a very robust discussion, and I would like to thank my fellow leaders and each of you for your support. 2023 will be a great year and lots of activities. Okay, with that, I'm moving on to the next item of that's right. Members, do you have any comments on the board? And the public, anybody on the public have any comment? Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, open up WebEx, please.
Certainly, we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a comment, you can either press the question mark icon in the lower right of your WebEx screen, type the word comment and click send, or you may press *3 to raise your hand if you're a call-in user, or you may press the hand icon to raise your hand if you are logged into WebEx.
You, Ms. Moderator. Okay.
Thank you. I see no request for comment. So shall I close public comment feature?
Yes, thank you
Thank you.
very much.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to item 6B. It's the resolution to retire California Board of Accountancy member Sochi Liang. This item is the resolution to retire California Board of Accountancy member Sochi Liang. Whereas Sochi Liang was appointed by the Senate Rules Committee, and she's faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy from January 7, 2015 through September 7, 2022. And whereas she served as the chair, vice chair, and member of the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, chair and member of the Legislative Committee, member of the Committee on Professional Conduct, member of the Strategic Planning Committee, and California Board of Accountancy member liaison to the Qualification Committee and Peer Review Oversight Committee. And whereas, there's going to be a lot of whereases, so bear with me because we have unfortunately, a lot of retiring members. She was a founder and co-chair of Latina in STEM and Achieve Success, member of the Hispanias, organized for political equality, and Wellesley College alumni treasurer. She was also co-founder and chair of the first and second Latino Study Research Symposium, logistic chair of Global Micro Entrepreneurship Award in Mexico, logistic chair of Harvard International Development Conference, and organizing member of the Harvard Latino Law and Public Policy Conference at Harvard University. And whereas Sochi Liang has held several positions at the Wells Fargo Bank, including Vice President of Enterprise Marketing, Hispanic Segment Marketing Manager, Vice President of Global Remittance Service, Head of Marketing and Analytics, Global Remittance Service, Consumer Retention Marketing Manager, and Global Remittance Service Project Manager. That's a mouthful, huh? She's done a lot of positions. She has also held position as the field researcher for Harvard University John F. Kennedy School of Government and consultant for No Barrier Inc. And whereas throughout her term of service, at all times, Sochi Liang gave fully of herself and her ideas and act forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their high esteem and regard, therefore it is be it resolved that the member of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Sochi Leong for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and to the consumer of California. Can I get a motion to accept the resolution? Thank you, Ms. Hines.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I see a second? Ms. Owens, second
second.
the motion. Any discussion from the member? Oh, I beg your pardon. Mr. Jacobson, I understand you have a hands up.
I just wanted to say that all of the women that we're going to be honoring here today are super women. They're brilliant, strong, and served on our board just with great distinction, and I'm going to miss them.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. Any other comment from the board? Public, do you have any comment here? Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, could you open up WebEx for comment?
Certainly, and we've opened up the Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you've got a comment, you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in the text box and click send. Anyone may also raise their hand to be recognized, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, Ms. Moderator, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Ms. Reed, could you call the vote?
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Yin Tu,
Yes.
and Evangeline Ward.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thanks, Ms. Reed. All right, our next item on the agenda is item 6C, is the resolution for retired California Board of Accountancy member Luz Molina Lopez. Whereas Ms. Lopez was appointed by Governor Edwin Brown Jr. and she has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy from October 11, 2017 through December 16, 2022. And whereas she served as chair and member of the Legislative Committee, chair and member of the Committee on Professional Conduct, vice chair and member of the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, member of the consideration of the CPA Experience Requirement Task Force, and California Board of Accountancy member liaison to the Qualification Committee and Enforcement Advisory Committee. And whereas she is a member of the Hispanics Organized for Political Equality, in 2017 Hispanic Organized for Political Equality Leadership Institution Fellow, and was elected City Clerk of National City in 2020. And whereas Ms. Lopez has over 20 years of service in regulation, compliance, contract administration, and quality analyst with a career in academic research administration. She managed federal grants for scientific research projects at UC San Diego and held delegate authority ensure compliance with federal, state, and University of California policies, and was a liaison between the institution and its funding agencies. She previously worked in biotech at Ajinomoto ASEAN Inc. as a technical proposal writer and in the manufacture of novel medicines for FDA clinical study. And whereas throughout her term of service, at all times, Ms. Lopez gave fully of herself and her ideas and acts forthrightly and consciously. always with the public interest and welfare in mind, and whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their highest esteem and regard. Therefore, be it resolved that the member of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Ms. Lopez for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and the Consumer of California. Can I get a motion to accept the resolution?
Motion to accept the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. Second by Mr. Rosenbaum. Is there any comment, discussion or comment from the public? Mr. Jacobson, I see your hands up.
I also wanted to mention that Luz is now Vice Mayor of National City.
Indeed, we're very proud of that. Thank you, Mr. Jacobson. Any further comment from the board members? Any comment from the public? Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, can you open up WebEx for comment?
Certainly. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you've got a comment, you may click the question mark icon, type the word comment and click send, or anyone may raise their hand to ask to be recognized by clicking on the hand icon, and call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the comment feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, Ms. Moderator.
You're welcome.
Yes. Ms. Reed, can you call for the vote?
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Yin Tu,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
and Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Moving on to item number 6D is the resolution for the retirement of California Board of Accountancy member Deidre Robinson. Therefore, Ms. Robinson was appointed, whereas Ms. Robinson was appointed by Governor Brown, and she has faithfully served as member of California Board of Accountancy from June 26, 2015 through September 8, 2022. And whereas she served as chair and member of the legislative committee, chair and member of the Committee on Professional Conduct, member of the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, and California Board of Accountancy member liaison to the Enforcement Advisory Committee and Qualifications Committee. And whereas she's member of the Society for Human Resource Management, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, member of the Golden State University Human Resource Management Advisory Committee, and member of the Coach Art San Francisco Board. And whereas Ms. Robinson developed and implemented activities to increase both efficiency and effectiveness in the delivery of academic degree program and certifications with a focus on student and community engagement in Golden Gate University, University of Phoenix, John F. Kennedy University, and Pacifica Graduate Institute. She has expanded economic development opportunity within the private, nonprofit, government, and corporate sectors, targeting local, regional, and international firms, community colleges, and school districts that strive to address educational training needs in the administrative leadership, strategic planning, strategic planning, development, implementation, and evaluation for entrepreneurship, philosophy, business innovation, curriculum, and related programming. And whereas throughout her term of service, at all times, Ms. Robinson gave fully of herself and her ideas and act forthrightly and consciously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their highest esteem and regard. Therefore, be it resolved that the member of California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Ms. Robinson for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and the consumer of California. Can I get a motion to accept the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Yep. Second by Ms. Owens. Any comment from the board? Yes.
I'd like to make a comment. All three of these women were public members of our board. And they took great interest, especially when it came to technical issues that we came upon. They were great students and always asked really, really good questions to educate themselves, and were tremendous assets and good friends.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Corrigan.
I want to add to what Mr. Savoy said by mentioning that those members who are not CPAs on the board add a very important aspect, viewpoint, et cetera, to what this board is here to do and how important their input is. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments, especially from Mr. Savoy and Ms. Corrigan, because being a public comment, there are times when I go, what? and I love the mentorship that you guys are providing to us as well. Any public comment in Sacramento? Seeing none? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Okay.
Jason Fox?
I blend in, that's okay. Jason Fox with the Jason Fox with the California Society of CPAs. I just want to echo the comments of Ms. Leone and Ms. Lopez and Ms. Robinson for being, representing the public on the Board of Accounts. It can be very daunting, but they all certainly engaged and learned and brought an important role in the conversation. So thank you to their service.
Thank you for that, Mr. Fox, because we did learn a lot. Trial by fire, as they say. Any other comment from the public? Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, please open up WebEx.
Thank you. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, they can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment into that text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Moderator.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to the next item. Oh, again, Ms. Reed, call for the vote.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines? Yes. Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Christian Lotta?
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens?
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Yin Tu?
Yes.
Evangeline Ward?
Yes.
And Nancy Corrigan? Yes. The motion carries.
Excellent. Thanks, Ms. Reed. Now we go to the next item, 6E. We want to share with everybody the new committee and liaison assignment. It's a written report. You all see it already, and we can move on to the next item. Item 6F, an educational overview of the California Peer Review Program. Ms. Center, you are ready to give us a report?
Yes, good morning. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the board an overview of the California Peer Review Program to assist members in their discussions on the next agenda item. Peer review is a systematic review of an accounting firm's accounting and auditing services performed by a peer reviewer who is unaffiliated with the firm being reviewed to ensure that work performed conforms to professional standards. Mandatory peer review was signed into California law in January of 2010. All firms, including sole proprietors, must undergo a peer review in order to renew their license if they provided accounting or auditing services during the preceding 3 years. In order to undergo a peer review, firms must enroll with a CBA-recognized peer review program provider. The board only approves peer review providers that meet the requirements of California Code of Regulations, Section 48. Currently, the board only recognizes the AICPA as an approved peer review program provider. There are 2 types of peer reviews: system reviews and engagement reviews. Accounting firms that perform audits as their highest level of service undergo a system review. Accounting firms that perform compilations or reviews as their highest level of service undergo an engagement review. Once a peer review is complete, the peer reviewer prepares a report and submits it to the administering entity for technical review and acceptance by a review acceptance body. Both system and engagement reviews are given a rating of either pass, pass with deficiencies, or substandard. Firms that receive a substandard review are required to submit to the board within 45 days of the acceptance of the report, along with any materials, if available, documenting completion of any or all prescribed remedial or corrective actions. The administering entity is required to submit all substandard peer review reports to the board within 60 days. Firms that are terminated from the program are required to notify the board within 30 days and provide the reason for termination. The board strives to maintain an active oversight process to ensure that the board-approved peer review program provider meets the minimum standards outlined by the board in regulation, receiving guidance from the Peer Review Oversight Committee, or PROC. The PROC holds meetings as necessary in order to conduct business and report to the board regarding the effectiveness of the mandatory peer review. Ensures that board-recognized peer review program providers administer peer reviews in accordance with the standards set forth in regulations, evaluate any applications to become a peer review program provider, and recommend approval or denial to the board. Refer to the board any board-recognized peer review program providers that fail to respond to any request. Collect and analyze statistical monitoring and reporting data from the board-recognized peer review program provider on an annual basis. Prepares an annual report to the board regarding the results of its oversight, and evaluates the peer reviewer population. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Vice President Tu.
Thank you, Ms. Santer. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none. Any from the public? And Ms. Moderator, please open up WebEx.
Certainly, we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a comment, they can look for the question mark icon, tap that, type the word comment into the text box and click send, or our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand, or anyone may press the hand icon to raise their hand. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. And I do not see any requests for public comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Santer, for setting us up for the next item, which is item 6G, discussion and possible action regarding the Peer Review Oversight Committee's ability to complete the required annual administration site visit. Ms. Santer again.
Thank you, Vice President Tu. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the board with information regarding the PROC's inability to conduct the administrative site visit, or ASV. The ASV is conducted of California's peer review administering entity, which is CalCPA. The CBA is asked to consider the denial of staff access to the ASV and direct staff on next steps as appropriate. In January 2019, the AICPA proposed changes to Chapter 3 of their Peer Review Oversight Handbook, which addresses confidentiality of peer review information in the regulatory environment. In response to the proposed changes, NASBA, the North Carolina State Board of Certified Public Account Examiners, the State of Wyoming Board of Certified Public Accountants, and the Nevada State Board of Accountancy submitted letters of concern to the AICPA, stating that state boards of accountancy have a statutory obligation to enforce and oversee the peer review process, and that state boards of accountancy should independently determine if a conflict of interest exists. At its May 16, 2019 meeting, this board approved a letter to the AICPA stating agreement with the feedback previously submitted to the AICPA by NASBA and the select state boards of accountancy. Additionally, the board letter provided the following feedback. AICPA should place consumer protection ahead of confidentiality, which is consistent with the board mission. AICPA's interpretation of peer review functions within a regulatory environment is general and does not apply to this board. State boards of accountancy are charged by legal statutes with enforcing and overseeing their peer review program requirements to ensure consumer protection and engender public trust. AICPA may want to reconsider its definition of conflict of interest and take into account state regulations that govern peer review in its revisions to Chapter 3 of the Oversight Handbook. In December 2021, the PROC performed its annual ASV to Cal CPA with staff in attendance. In October 2022, as the PROC began preparing for the 2022 ASV, the board was informed that the AICPA peer review program standards prevented Cal CPA from sharing confidential peer review information with regulatory agency staff, which is necessary in order to complete the ASV. The ASV was canceled while Cal CPA and AICPA continued their discussions regarding staff access to confidential peer review information. The board has become almost entirely reliant on the PROC to advise and alert the board of issues relevant to the board's oversight of the California peer review program, including any issues that may be identified during the ASV. Relying solely on the PROC to advise the board has inherent risk, such as lack of consistency for conducting the annual site visit, key person dependencies, and the inability for staff to observe and validate the peer review program is being conducted as directed by the board and in accordance with relevant statutes and regulations. Under the direction of board leadership, CBA has been working to include staff in peer review oversight. However, AICPA continues to deny board staff access to the ASV based on concerns with confidentiality and conflict of interest. Attendance at the ASV is necessary to conduct oversight of a state-mandated program, and state law and regulations take precedence over the AICPA peer review program standards. California Code of Regulations, Section 48.3, authorizes the board to access peer review information, including confidential information. The AICPA peer review program standard states that confidential information should be disclosed only as required by law. This language would suggest that any law that provided a state board of accountancy the right to view confidential information would supersede the AICPA's confidentiality requirements. Without access to confidential information, the board cannot adequately perform oversight of the peer review program. Therefore, the board may wish to take action on one or more of the following: requesting AICPA present at a future board meeting, send a letter from the board president to the AICPA directing them to allow staff to attend future ASVs consistent with the board's role in peer review oversight, add a future agenda presentation regarding the process of withdrawing recognition of a peer review program provider, or at a future agenda presentation regarding the addition of peer review program oversight concerns to the upcoming CBA sunset report. This concludes my presentation. I will turn it back over to Vice President Chu. I will do my best to answer questions.
Thanks, Ms. Sandra, for that very detailed report. Any member of the board like to make a comment, have questions? Yes, Ms. Hines.
So this may seem obvious, but why doesn't the peer reporting review form, could the peer reporting review form include like a disclosure statement that says that in order for the peer review to be considered as acceptable by the CBA, sorry, that confidential information will be disclosed? And I mean, is that something that could satisfy address the AICPA's concern about conflict of interest? Because it feels like they're intertwined. Like you can't have your peer review considered and fulfill your responsibility to be peer reviewed unless the CBA has the ability to oversee the process. And by submitting themselves to the process and needing to be peer reviewed, it seems as though the firm implicitly is agreeing to all the conditions of the peer review process. So it seems like there should be this could be satisfied by a disclosure, statement, but then seeing the letter from Wyoming and Nevada, I'm acknowledging that maybe I'm thinking too simplistically. So, is there some other way that we can, with a disclosure statement or something like that, negotiate a resolution to this?
You're gonna need to unpackage that.
Yeah.
I guess that's really more of a question directed towards the AICPA than staff, because from our perspective, this is not really up for, it's not really an issue of overcoming some type of confidentiality. They're required by law to undergo peer review, so they submit themselves to peer review. And in all essence, from our perspective, as Ms. Center had noted, we specifically wrote things in there to make sure we were expansive in terms of how we can collect information, both from the provider and from the individual. So that I think the question of whether or not it satisfies some issues that the AICPA has concerns about is really more directed to them, at least from staff's perspective. It could be something that could be discussed, but I don't think it's actually necessary because I believe our law is more than sufficient to require compliance. But if it helps move the dialogue along, that could be something, just bearing in mind that any kind of suggestion that would update our form would take a year to 2 years to kind of address. And during that time, we would still potentially be in this limbo of performing our administrative site visit.
If I could follow up, is it something that could be done simultaneous? Like, can they be done simultaneously? So could we ask AICPA to come to the CBA to provide some resolution that this is a problem that needs to be resolved, and since it's AICPA's problem, AICPA should be expected to come up with a solution for it, and in the meantime, potentially, initiate that some kind of resolution on our own side, and try to work through this, because we can't obviously wait till AICPA gets here and continue to be, thwarted from fulfilling our responsibility, our duties to the consumers, but we also, want to get them in to talk us through a resolution. And maybe some of my CPA colleagues can also help me out here, because again, this to me from the outside seems like a fairly straightforward, issue to address, but maybe I'm missing something, here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dominic.
So 2 things. One, that is kind of one of the options that we've outlined to kind of send an official request to the AICPA. But as luck would have it, the AICPA is here. And there is a member, Mr. Jim Brackens, who oversees the peer review side of things, who might be able to provide some insight, maybe both. I won't speak for him, but he can provide some insight that might provide some clarity as to where the AICPA's position is, and answer some of your questions about that suggestion. So if he wants to come up, he's welcome to.
Ms. Bracken, Mr. Bracken, would you like to come up and share your view?
Is that working? Okay, thank you. Jim Brackens, yes, I'm Vice President of Ethics and Practice Quality at the AICPA. I want to step back, if I could, and it'll be ultimately addressing that question. Ms. Friends and I don't go back a ways. I guess it was 12, 13 years ago. We were meeting to have peer review become a condition of licensure in this fine state. And in retrospect, I can see that some of the way that we had things that have been worded have led to probably differences of opinion, I guess is a way to put it, in terms of what the law and the regulation states. So I'm going to just step back, all the way back in terms of even talking about why confidentiality has been embedded in our program since its inception back in the 80s, actually, 1980s. From the perspective of, first off, as has been mentioned, the purpose of peer review is it's a remedial process. It's meant for firms to, where they are having difficulties in performing a test work, to learn, what's wrong and to remediate. That's what we believe is in the public interest or consumer interest, is for the firms to perform the work appropriately. With that in mind, firms are, knowing that that is the end result of a peer review, that they will be given the opportunity to remediate, they are forthcoming. They provide information readily to the reviewer, knowing that's the process. If they were to, the concern from the inceptions then is if they believe that this is a potentially punitive process, to where they would be subjected to where they may have erred in their performance of the work, that they would be then brought before a regulatory body, that they would be less than forthcoming, that the reviewer wouldn't be given access, just actually the work papers would be hidden, and the process, we would not achieve what we're trying to do in terms of remediation. And I would say that's the vast majority of the firms, that would not be the case, but there is that is the fear. So when the peer review program was brought to a member vote to make it mandatory at that time for AICPA membership, if this confidentiality provision was embedded, and we've been told by our legal counsel that is something we can go to a certain extent, but we cannot go but so far in terms of what we provide to those that potentially would be in a regulatory position. And when I say regulatory, that also encompasses not just a state board, it also encompasses within our own internal processes. For example, our ethics division cannot be given access to information as well, because that's deemed a punitive measure on a firm if they should violate professional standards. So it's not limited to state boards. It is just this promise of confidentiality so the program can go forward. Now, rolling forward, this board, as well as all but two licensing jurisdictions, have recognized the value of peer review in enhancing audit quality and being in the public consumer interest. And I applaud that. We support that. We also recognize that boards would like to have visibility into the effectiveness of the program, whether it's being administered in accordance with our standards, so that you can have confidence that it's working. And we have taken multiple steps to try and provide means for that to be done. The Peer Review Oversight Committee is one example. That's why when we worked collaboratively to have the law and the regulations put in place in California, we wanted to make sure that a Peer Review Oversight Committee was established, because for a long time, we have considered a Board of Accountancy and its staff as being a regulatory body that would violate our confidentiality provisions if they were given access. So the idea is, if you have a peer review oversight committee that's made up of non-Board of Accountancy members, doesn't have to be a CPA, but generally is. Again, that's up to the board, of course, who's on the committee with, in fact, I want to step back. Our peer review oversight committee could be made up of members of the board and staff, that's fine. It's just what we have to speak to in our chapter 3 that's mentioned is what we what we would deem a conflict of interest and where we would provide access to certain information. But setting that aside, what has been occurred through a number of boards across the country is establishing a peer review oversight committee made up, as I've said, of non-board members and non-staff, and they are given complete access to information through the process. They observe the RABs, they can see everything we do because they have sworn in essence that they will not reveal that information. They will comment on the appropriateness of the process, and it's done in a number of ways. A few have a very sophisticated way of doing it in California. Some are less sophisticated, but that is the way the process has worked, and that is the reason we have the confidentiality. You mentioned the letters of comment received and when we were revising the chapter. That is quite correct. We did receive that. Now, subsequent to what's in your meeting materials, we took further steps. We did a survey with the state boards of accountancy, and we found out overwhelmingly what we heard is the information that staff needed was more directed to individual firms in terms of whether they were complying with the program, whether they were enrolled in peer review, whether they were given remedial actions, whether they were complying or not, just to, again, to make sure that remediation was taking place. I mean, we've since developed a number of items that, again, with firm permission, can be put on our facilitated state board access. But whether you didn't mention them, Michelle, I should. The way that we provide a lot of information to board and board staff is through this technology. That's how your all's fail, or I should say, substandard reports are communicated. We absolutely agree that that's a requirement. The firms, when they sign up for the review, agree that will be made public if they have a fail, and it's on the website. We now have this other information available that the boards have requested to be able to be put on FSBA through the process. And some boards, in fact, in particular, one board of accountancy has said, can you help us develop language in our regulations so that that would also be mandatory, that's going to automatically be populated as a part of the peer review. We're working with them to do that. When there are areas, because we absolutely have the same mission in my mind, that when a firm is not complying with the program, that is not remediating dating it like it should be, that is not in the consumer or public interest. And we want to facilitate in any manner we can for the boards and the board staff to be aware of that. That's not our mission. So we've taken these other steps. But unfortunately, we cannot go to the extent of revealing what we believe is a conflict of interest. We just can't.
Yeah. If you can stay on, we'll continue our discussion. Mr. Jacobson, you have your hands up. Mute. You on mute. Dan, you on mute.
Not anymore. Michelle, what are the what categories of confidential information would be revealed, and to whom is the revelation made?
So during the annual site visit, I can describe, it was myself that attended the last one, so I was the individual present. The type of information that we looked at had to do with individual peer review documents, including the names of the firms, the findings that were made, remedial actions that were taken, and any comments that may have been made or conclusions that may have been made by that reviewing acceptance body that I mentioned.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Hine.
So thank you for for joining us, and Mr. Brackenton also for the background. And I'm going to ask for some patience because I am new to this and I am a public member. So I'm just trying to process all of this. I have a few questions though. First off, one of the things that you mentioned about this whole process is some concern that firms would not be forthcoming, that this is a remedial process and you want the firms to be robust in forthcoming and coming to the process. And that if they knew that this information was readily available to this regulatory body, then they might be less hesitant to be forthcoming. But there's an inherent conflict there from our perspective about the ethics of a firm that knows that it has to engage in this peer review process in order for it to be deemed to be fulfilling its responsibilities in doing audits, that if they know that in order for them to be deemed to be eligible to provide these kinds of services, they have to submit to peer review. Inherent in that or implicit in that is that they have to be ethical in their process of operating as a firm. So if a firm were not going to be forthcoming in engaging in this process, doesn't that compromise the ethics of the firm just like right out the gate? And what's the purpose of having an oversight process if we have to be concerned about whether or not firms are going to, in good faith, engage in that process? I mean, that tension, that conflict, I'm trying to figure out how to sort of reconcile that. So could you speak to that first, please?
Yeah, I would say that in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to worry about that. I'm speaking of human nature. Yes, the vast majority of the firms would not hesitate, in my mind, in my experience. The vast majority of the members of this profession, of which I'm a part, are very ethical and do not have an issue. But human nature is what it is, and there will be those that even we would consider ethical in their normal dealings, but would still be somewhat hesitant, to be forthcoming with, and maybe it's not even with the, not disclosing an engagement, although that can occur. It could be in terms of how forthcoming they are when they have open conversations with the peer reviewer, because part of the peer review process is even asking, where are difficulties, where areas, asking staff, where have you seen situations that the firm maybe is not giving you a sufficient education in the process. It's just the tone of a peer review. If they're not comfortable in terms of speaking, that what they are saying is being held in confidence and is going to be used to further the education and the proficiency of the firm. It's just human nature to make it less, less efficient, less effective in the peer review process.
More. That's all right. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm asking that. I'm not asking it to be adverse.
Yeah. Can I? No, yeah. Let me. I should step back. Okay. Because I absolutely understand your perspective. Okay, I do. But when going way back, when again this program has existed, this originally was a voluntary position. It was really just for AICPA members to be able to hold themselves apart by saying we are so attuned, we so embrace quality that we're willing to go through this process. Then I don't want to say because we're better than anybody else, but it was it was like that sort of. So it was always meant to be an improvement process and to be able to demonstrate quality. When boards started saying, yes, we like this program, we think peer review is as important as, say, getting mandatory CPE, which used to not exist. It's something that helps consumer interest. It furthers a process. It was with the understanding it was accepting the process that we have. Okay. So I understand your perspective. Sitting where you are, I would probably, I would have that same concern. But the point is we have a process that that exists, and that's the one we have to maintain. That's what we have promised to our members as well. I mean, it is our process. So we hope boards will accept it. We're trying to do everything we can to make it, let boards be comfortable with the process, but there is just a line we're not allowed to cross.
And so I appreciate this because, and it's not to be adversarial, it really is to have an understanding, because in order for us to come up with possible recommendations or a resolution, we really have to understand what is behind the rationale for creating this conflict. And, you know, one of the suggestions is having this body of individuals that are separate from the regulatory body that would be part of this process, that would be approved by the CPA in our case, that would be part of the process and would resolve the AICPA's concerns about conflict of interest. Practically speaking, though, and this is kind of similar to what you're saying about health, human nature, from the firm perspective, practically speaking, that's a very hard standard to meet, because boards of accountancy are struggling to keep their boards and their committees at capacity. I mean, right now our board has 4 vacancies. Each of our committees has vacancies on it where we have quorum issues. So the notion that we somehow have to, that the resolution is come up with another body to which other, you know, professionals are appointed that have to take up their professional time in order to resolve this. I mean, when we're balancing and weighing all of the issues here, you know, that unfortunately doesn't feel very practical. You know, that doesn't feel like a very practical resolution either. You know, so there, you know, again, appreciating that you're here and that there's a negotiation, you know, it seems like our solution here may be to direct staff and our president to, you know, engage in talks with AICPA about some potential resolutions that both groups can live with, and then bring that back to the board at a later time.
Believe me, I would like to find a resolution. In fact, one of the conversations I've had is with Dan Dustin with NASB. I think many of you all have met. I mean, one of the things he's thought about is he's noted that we have and again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of our process. I don't want to confuse you all, but one of the bodies that we have with the peer review board, one of our volunteer groups is called the Oversight Task Force. And they are charged with a number of things, but a part of it is overseeing the administering process herself. We are concerned about whether the administering entities are conducting their activities the way that the peer review board wants them to do it. We have a member of the Oversight Task Force that is a NASB appointee. He's a former member of the North Carolina Board of Accountancy. He's been active in NASB. Dan suggested that would it be acceptable to this body that that this individual participate in an oversight, when the Oversight Task Force, which also oversights the California Society, that he participate in that oversight, so that you have someone that can provide assurance to the board. I mean, Dan threw that out. I mean, I haven't discussed with my staff, but I know we would have no objections. So we would like to find some solution, yes.
Mr. Ricken, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm struggling with the fact that one of the committee members attending these meetings, because I think we need professional staff that will be there, because just like Ms. Hines said, that's a lot of time commitment for anybody as a volunteer to do. And then secondly, Ms. Hines, just for your information, I know staff have been in discussion with AICPA for a year and a half now on this topic matter, but I also have President Salazar raise hand, and Ms. Owens, you're going to be next after Ms. Salazar.
All right, thank you, Chair Chu. So this is Katrina Salazar, Mr. Brackens, and I appreciate you coming here to address our group. You know, I guess what I'd like you to address, maybe I should step back a bit. I'm seeing more than one issue. There's some issues about communicating things that increase operational efficiency, and can we get status updates? But you know, my understanding of one of the core concerns of our board is the administrative site visits. And so the last agenda item that was just discussed, which was item F, included the administrative site visit. And so, you know, in your conversation, you mentioned RABs, which I think are report acceptance meetings. And, I can understand that there's more detailed information here, but our checklist is really more geared towards the AE systems. How are minimum qualifications set for peer reviewers? I mean, if you look at this, these are not specific to individual licensees necessarily. And so I guess I want to bring us back to the oversight function. You know, understanding there's confidentiality, there also has to be some insight into the systems and the processes in place. And I guess that's maybe where, as a board member, I would like to hear a little bit more fleshed out, because that's where I'm confused about why that information isn't being provided at all. So any insight either from Mr. Franzella or Mr. Brackens about this might be helpful. Thank you.
I'll have Mr. Brackens and then.
Yeah, well, Ms. Franzella, if you want to comment first, that's okay. Okay. I actually want to be clear. Yes, I realize it's a site visit, and probably what I wasn't clear about is the purpose of the oversight task force. It conducts, in essence, does the same thing as a site visit that's performed by your PROC. And so that's why the suggestion that Dan's made is that since it's the same function, maybe there'd be confidence in this, the former NASBA board member who's a NASBA appointee to our PROC participating in our oversight, because it would perform the same purpose. That's what I was trying to get to. Because yes, I understand it's not just firms. It's the problem is during a site visit you end up having access. It's impossible to separate out some of the information during a site visit from the confidential firm information.
And I think Mr. Brackens just touched on that at the end. It's really some of what we're looking at, President Salazar, is the underlying information to assess whether or not it's being, whether or not the steps within the administration of the peer review program. So you are looking at specific information, and you are looking at maybe various firm letters, various firm information, identifying information. So that is what's being accessed during that process.
Anything else, President Salazar? Thank you. Ms. Owens?
I think mine's probably a continuation of Katrina's question, but I guess if this was able to be done before, what changed to make it not be done now, besides changing your confidentiality language?
Unfortunately, we would probably have been having this discussion a year ago. It was unfortunate because the staff was not supposed to participate last year. I mean, from our perspective, it's when we became aware of it, it's when we had to, basically step in and say that couldn't repeat.
Mr. Jacobson, you have a question or a comment?
I have a question, and I think this may be to Helen, who I think is well, the WebEx isn't that clear, but I think is in the group.
She is.
Thank you. Business and Professions Code Section 5063.3 prohibits the disclosure of confidential information, except, and then there are 7 exceptions, and one exception is those. Let's see. It says that disclosures specified by the board in regulation. Do we have a regulation that specifies that would come in handy in this case, or work with it in this case?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Franzella for the answer to that question. I think the disclosures that you're referencing may not be specific to receiving information from the board-approved peer entity, or sorry, peer review entity, as opposed to from the licensee. So I'll let him clarify, and then if I need to chime in, I will.
Yeah, I believe 5063 and 5063.3 is part of the Code of Professional Conduct applicable to licensees and information receipt. So I don't think that that particular code section is applicable here. We're looking more at, I believe, 5076, 5076.1, and section.
Attachment 7 also has the California Code of Regulations site that might help, Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, Ms. Ward, do you have some comments or questions?
Thank you. I wanted to just mention or maybe suggest, I think if I'm hearing right, I understand what's happening between both sides. And yes, a firm might not want to disclose too much, knowing that the board would see it and they can put themselves at risk or in trouble. Have anyone looked at other organizations, what they do with their peer review? So not CPA or like CBA type of organizations, but other groups. I'm from dental, so Dental Board of California has a peer review, but it's kind of reversed. If a dentist gets in trouble, the board says, okay, this is something minor, let CDA, their peer review, take care of it and report back to us. So then they're out of it. If they're not a member of California Dental Association, CDA, then the board takes control of the situation. So the peer review is kind of used in a way of will help correct the problem because it wasn't done on purpose. It's not something where you went out on purpose kind of thing. So I just want to suggest maybe take a look at other organizations, other boards that have peer review to see how they use their peer review.
Yeah, actually, we have looked, not recently, but we've always been curious to see how other boards operate. What you described, though, is really what we do in our ethics function, because that is the case that, although it is definitely deemed punitive by our members because we may disclose to the public that, that they violated our code of conduct, but that's also deemed to be, the idea is to be remedial. In fact, we work with some state boards that have lack of resources will actually work collaboratively with us in that process. But from our perspective, that's why we, in essence, have what we call a wall, because we consider one more enforcement versus, a process of self-improvement, as it were, for peer review. So yes, we have looked at them, but what you described, a process we have as well.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Any other comments or questions from the board members? And Mr. Brecken, thank you for being here. I have one other comment, is that historically speaking, have we ever used that space to actually take enforcement action on any of the firms?
Yes, and so maybe just a little bit of additional context for members. Yes, and going back to what Mr. Brackens had mentioned earlier, the genesis of peer review was membership oriented within the AICPA's program, and so its foundations are built around that. And yes, it's evolved over time, but now I believe the dynamics have changed somewhat of how peer review is used nationally. It is more, it's been incorporated, I think, by all but 2 state boards of accountancy. It is really a regulatory environment that is being, that peer review operates in now. It's not optional. It is a requirement for license renewal. It's a condition to maintain your license. So the board, when adopting this, was sensitive to that fact. And yes, it still has a strong foundation in remediation and education. It definitely is also built, and the board's opening line in its report to the legislature, which I can recall, is it's built on a foundation of enforcement and education. So it took into consideration this regulatory environment that it was going to be operating under. So I think that changes some of the dynamics as to, yes, this bylaw has this was developed during that time, but it no longer appears to apply. And I think state boards of accountancy, as you see in some of the letters, have pushed back over time in terms of what's allowable, what's not. In essence, the board has authority to kind of ask for anything from a licensee related to peer review, has structured that particular code section with the AICPA in such a way to say, we want this information. Our goal is, it's not to use that in a vindictive way. Staff are using it and want to participate and feel a need, and it's appropriate for them to participate, because we have a responsibility to make sure to this board and this body and to the state of California that the peer review oversight committee is doing its functions and meeting the expectations of what this board is doing. And relying solely on the PROC, we did that for a long time and it was appropriate, but now we've evolved and know the risks and rewards. Whether or not she was supposed to or not last year participated in that, and it was such an invaluable experience that this board should not be deprived of that going forward, and that's kind of where staff's position is on this. So to that extent, I hope to provide some context of why we're here and why we've worked so hard with past President Savoy, as well as when Ms. Corrigan was president, to try to address this particular issue separately, and now it's before the board to kind of provide staff some direction to work more effectively with the AICPA. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Ms. Corrigan?
I need clarification as to, was your question a little more specific? Was it, has information developed as a part of the oversight function or the administrative site visit used for an enforcement matter? That was your question? Yes. I don't, that specifically, no, because the purpose of that is not to say, oh, look at these firms. Okay, now let's go discipline them. Not at all. The purpose is what Mr. Franzella just explained. So that information is not used to, am I correct, Mr. Franzella? So I wanted to make sure that we're addressing specifically what the question was.
Apologies, yes. Nothing from the administrative site visit or the peer review oversight committee's functions has formed a basis for any type of enforcement action. Has peer review? Absolutely. Anybody who's been on this board for the past 13 years or so has seen a huge influx of enforcement actions because of peer review, failed peer reviews. So in that respect, yes, peer review has a definitive enforcement component to it. So, but not from the, nothing that Ms. Center would see or staff or any staff member would see would be used for the purposes of then turning it around and using it in a negative aspect.
So, Mr. Brinken, I'm a little puzzled on what the concern for the conflict.
And this is where I said it's unfortunate. I see your all's perspective, but it's also from what our perspective is and what we're informed by our general counsel, that we believe if there is a conflict of interest that exists, that there is a certain level that we cannot go in terms of providing information. I mean, that's really, that's kind of the bottom line. Because I will agree with Mr. Franzella, you know, yes, peer review has an enforcement ability. We applaud that. That's why I come back to this additional information we provide. One of the things we really want boards to be aware of, their staff, are firms, you know, whether they're remediating appropriately. And if they are not remediating, we absolutely, those are the ones we all have concerns about. You know, that's the small minority out there, but that's the ones we like to see enforcement winning. You know, we in essence kick them out of the program. You all can take other actions beyond that. So yeah, this is what's unfortunate here is we do have the same objective of what we're trying to accomplish. It's just there is a certain line that where we are, a certain restriction we have.
Mr. Savoy?
I don't want anybody here to lose sight of our main objective, which is the consumer protection. And if there's anything that's being withheld from this board to not be able to do our job correctly, that is a concern of ours. And I will not be specific because you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to leave it at that.
Mr. Jacobson, your hand's raised. Do you still have a comment or question? You're muted.
Thank you very much. it seems to make sense to me to make all of our legislatures, laws, statutes, and our regulations fit would also satisfy, may also satisfy the current issue if we could just make if we could just have a team that is not in, that cannot be involved in enforcement, and we make a regulation that says that that team gets the peer review information. It cannot be involved in enforcement, and then it seems like we've potentially solved the problem.
Mr. Jacobson, I appreciate your comment, but I think we would want our staff, no matter who that is, if they do see any violation or so forth, they would be forthcoming to in terms of the enforcement aspect of things. So I would not, for one, be comfortable with the concept of sending somebody that would not have any enforcement abilities or reporting abilities. Ms. Hines, and then.
I agree with you. I think, I mean, the most logical person to be involved in this process would be most likely the licensing chief, and then you would basically preclude your your licensing chief from being involved in any kind of action after that. I mean, that's the challenge with that. I did have one other, thing I wanted to mention. What if the CPA were to do a regulation, like kind of do a hard line, we're going to change our regulations that state something like, we're going to change, I'm looking at this section, CCR, California Code of Regulations, Article 6, Section 48, which defines the minimum requirements for a peer review program. If the CBA were to do something like initiate a change in the regulations that said a peer review program cannot be approved unless it agrees to allow for oversight by the CBA, what would be the effect with AICPA? Would you just pull out of the the oversight process? Like what would be some of the consequences potentially of that? Oh, your mic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We would no longer be a provider for peer review for purposes of licensure in California.
And yes, this is legal, if I may.
Yes.
Yes, it is part of the law. So to understand both what kind of your question and your previous question, as well as Mr. Jacobson's question, the licensee shall disclose both to peer review and shall disclose to CBA that within CBA's jurisdiction. And so from the statutory point of view, as well as our regulations, there's nothing of consequence before the board that the peer review provider can provide. And so if the peer review provider cannot provide that when all shall be disclosed, it is impossible for the board to provide adequate oversight, and therefore the law does provide that the board can withdraw their approval of a provider and find another provider.
I appreciate that, but what I was trying to get at was because this conflict exists, if the board were to be direct in stating that this is an absolute requirement, I was trying to flesh out what some of the consequences might be. It's kind of it's like if we did the nuclear option of passing a law, what's some of the consequences that we could see happening? And what I suspected is that we would be in a situation where AICPA would say we can no longer provide you with peer review oversight. I just wanted to confirm that potentially be a consequence. And that would put us that's a problematic place for us to be in as well as a board, that we no longer have a peer review provider, So if we were going to go that nuclear route, what would be our alternative? How will we address this dysfunction? And so thank you. I just wanted to kind of flesh that out a little bit.
Well, and if I could add, the law does provide that they shall provide, and we shall provide oversight. And so other than further clarifying and making a specific sentence, this mandate is already present.
It's not the nuclear options. It's already in place.
Well, but it's not being, but by denying a visit, then the AICPA is actually pushing back and saying that our regulations do not adequately require them to allow licensing. So so a nuclear option of providing the distinct clarifying language actually is needed if you want to get to the point of really seeing what your problem is. But what we should do, I think, first is figure out if there is some kind of resolution that we can get to in the meantime. But if we really thought that this was a problem that we needed to fix, then our option may be, let's review our peer review oversight, program, rather than us relying upon AICPA to be the sort of, for lack of a better word, dictator of how the process will go.
And as chair, I'm hearing a lot of the comments, and it sounds like even with Mr. Rankin's, they have a position already. So I think it's incumbent to us, probably do need to either give direction to staff that we need to enforce our regulation that we have in place already. So but before we I will ask for a motion or something, or somebody want to make a motion. Ms. Latta, you still have some comments and questions?
Thank you, Ms. Tu. I just wanted to add to Ms. Hines and Ms. Tu's concerns about the practicality of doing the new composition of the peer review of CPAs. Not only does the CBA have capacity issues, but this is an industry issue as well. So our non-CBA CPAs are dealing with their own capacity issues and staffing issues, which would impede them from having that time to volunteer because they're absorbing extra workload in general. So I do agree with the impracticality of that. So I just wanted to see if maybe there's any other potential resolutions, because that seems to be the only one at on the floor right now. So that was one thought I had. And then also kind of circling back to Ms. Tu, I think our job today here is to determine what the next action is. And one of the options seems to, we've already addressed number one by having AICPA here today. So yeah, I kind of wanted to circle back and see what are we going to do in terms of directing staff next.
Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, and Ms. Latta's last comment is exactly what I was leading to. Staff have suggested these 4 items on page 4 of the agenda item, and I realize we do have Mr. Brackens here today. Whether there's something we want further from AICPA attendance in the future, we could certainly consider that. And I guess a question maybe for Ms. Center, it's all of our jobs to determine this, but do these 4 steps still seem to be appropriate, or having heard everyone in their presentations, is there something further that staff might add to this?
I think that Mr. Brackens and I respectfully disagree, but respectfully, just to point that out. Mr. Brackens did express his statement regarding what their next steps would be regarding certain things, but I do believe that it would be still appropriate, while you see in here a letter from this board to AICPA kind of outlining our direction, our assertion of what we have is still an appropriate option, so that we hear that response officially, hopefully in writing from AICPA regarding what their next steps would be when and if we, I don't want to describe in writing that we already have these laws and regulations which require them to provide us with information that's been requested as, and is seen in the annual site visit. So I think that's still appropriate, even though Mr. Brackens has said that. I think that he has been allowed to provide a pretty extensive presentation to this board. So I personally am not sure that he or AICPA would have additional information to share. So I do believe that one has already been satisfied. In terms of having a future agenda item, we have spent quite a bit of time on this one, and so I would suggest we might want to amend that to the next agenda item would be what staff have been able to accomplish after receiving the direction that we're given today on next steps.
All right. Any other question or comment? Oh, Mr. Jacobson, do you still want to?
Yes, Helen, do you have in front of you, or do you know the citation, any citations that about are already having the ability to gather this information?
I have many citations in front of me, but I believe Ms. Center would have those by heart.
It's in our written reports, I believe, Ms. Center, right?
Yes, in our written report, as well as my verbal description, I did provide the sections that I believe are relevant, including California Code of Regulations 48.3, which I think is the one in particular that explicitly states that the board has a right to see these information as part of peer review being part of its licensing function.
Regulatory obligations, basically. Ms. Hine.
I'd like to make a motion that the CBA take the actions recommended by Ms. Center previously, and I'll allow her to articulate them, and to then come back with a recommendation as to next steps.
Mm-hmm. With the objection of taking out the first item because Mr. Bracken is already here.
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Colligan.
And I will second that motion.
I have a second.
This is legal, if I may clarify.
Could I clarify what the motion is?
Absolutely.
So it is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're asking us to do is put in writing and send a letter to AICPA explicitly outlining our regulatory language, as well as our right to receive and review this confidential information. Would you like us to also include in that a request that we get a response in writing from them within 30 days?
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And that was my clarification. There were several options, including vote right now, to dismiss them. So is the second amended?
Yes, I amend my second to incorporate this last discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Franzello?
Sorry I was trying to get in before that happened. I assume it's the board's direction to have that come from the board. So if so, I would appreciate that it be directed that we work with Ms. Salazar to approve that letter, and that once the response is provided, staff will work to prepare a future agenda item. I don't want to commit to the next meeting not knowing when we'll get a letter out, when we'll do those types of things. So if we can have that kind of just slid in to the motion a little bit, that would help.
I think that it's adequate for the president and the staff I think the president has the authority to work with staff to draft. implicit in that, that our direction to me is that the president will work with staff to draft that letter
Yes, but
on
thank you
behalf of
for,
the board.
thank you for that clarification, though. So, Ms. Center, you have direction, and if I can ask, yeah, I will, yeah. I want to see if there's any public comment here. Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, could you open WebEx, please?
Certainly, and we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a comment on the motion, you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen. Click that, type the word comment in the text box and click send. Anyone may also raise their hand to ask to be recognized by clicking on the hand icon, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. And I do not see any requests for public comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Moderator. And now, Ms. Reed, could you call the vote?
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Yin Tu,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Again, Mr. Brecken, thank you for being here. We appreciate you coming way before we even asked. And on that note, instead of going to the next item, I'm going to have us break for our morning break. And we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. We're back from our break, and we're going to continue our agenda. We're going to do a little bit of fast forwarding the treasury report because we have a couple of hard stops for people, and we're going to take out of order item 8A, which is the report from the treasurer and secretary.
Thank you very much. Item 8A, included in your materials, is the report of the Secretary Treasurer. I would like to point out a few things about that report. It's for the first quarter for 22-23. Before we discuss our current year budget and expenditures, I want to report that on January 10, the governor released its proposed budget for next year, 23-24. And the CBA's proposed budget authority is presently set at $18,763,000. For the current fiscal year, the report you have reflects the CBA's budget authority at $17,898,000. However, the CBA has received additional information that adjustments to our budget have been made to offset a salary increase that was effective last July 1, 2022. As a result, the CBA's budget authority increased to $18,558,000 and will be reflected in the mid-year financial report, which is scheduled for presentation at the March CBA meeting. Moving on to revenues, CBA revenues totaled approximately $4.2 million for the period beginning July 1 through September 30, 2022, with projected revenues exceeding $17 million by the end of the fiscal year. As displayed on the financial statement located on page 3, actual expenditures and encumbrances as of September 30, 2022 were nearly $4.7 million. The CBA's fund condition statement, which is page 7, projects the CBA to be at 5.3 months in reserve at the end of the fiscal year. And I think that is one of the lowest situations we've had for a while. You will also notice that the $10 million loan to the general fund is expected to be repaid next year. This concludes my presentation of the Secretary Treasury report. I'm happy to answer and have staff available to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenbaum. Anybody on the board have any questions or comments? Seeing none, any public comments here? Seeing none, Ms. Moderator, could you open the WebEx?
Certainly, we're opening the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, you may look for the question mark icon. After you click that, you'll see a text box. Type the word comment and click send, or anyone may raise their hand by clicking on the hand icon, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes. And I see no request for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the item 8B1, oversight of need and activity complete by the California Board of Accountancy fee assessment. Ms. Pierce?
Thank you so much. So we have captured this report into 3 parts. One is the background, just to kind of bring members up to speed regarding some of the activities that we've undertaken in the last couple of years, and then some additional historical information. And then we will have a fee analysis presentation by Mr. Matt Nishimi from the DCA Budget Office, who is participating via WebEx. And then after his presentation, we'll circle back around and we'll have more of a policy discussion regarding any actions that the board would like to take with regards to their fee increase. So just starting out, the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA with a brief historical overview of the CBA's fee levels, the need for a fee analysis, and the activities completed for the presentation of the fee analysis by the Department of Consumer Affairs. There's basically 2 parts to this background paper. One part covers the CBA's fee level history, and the second part discusses the work surrounding the fee analysis itself. So starting with the CBA's budget and fee level history, I think it's important to state that the CBA is a special funded agency, which means we rely on the fees collected for various services that are provided to examination and licensure applicants, licensees, and other stakeholders to provide the financial resources necessary to operate. The CBA's fees are established through a combination of statutory provisions and regulations. On page 3 of the agenda item, there is a chart that contains a history of the various fee levels dating back to 2000. And I am not going to go back to 2000 and talk about those levels, but I'm going to start in 2011, which is when the CBA took initial action to lower the license renewal and initial licensure fee from the $200 level to $120. The goal at this time was to operate a negative cash flow where expenditures exceeded revenues in order to draw down its reserve, because at that time it was approaching historically high levels. So following the first year of reduced fees, the CBA determined that the reduction did not have the anticipated impact and initiated another reduction, reducing those fees to $50 for a 2-year period. The license renewal and initial license fee was set to automatically return to the $120 level following the 2-year period, unless the CBA, through an analysis, determined a different fee level should be set. The CBA conducted an analysis in fiscal year 14-15 and initiated a rulemaking to return the license renewal and initial license fees back to the $200 level where we started, and the regulatory proposal was not approved, and as a result, the license renewal fee of $120 was reinstated in July 2016. This level kept the CBA at a negative cash flow, but since the CBA was awaiting repayment of loans from the general fund, as noted in the agenda item, our reserve level remained healthy. In January 2018, the CBA initiated another rulemaking to increase the license renewal and initial license fees from the $120 level to the statutory maximum of $250. This fee increase would generate more revenue that would closely align with expenditures. On the legislative side, in 2019, as the CBA was undergoing its sunset review, it began pursuing a change to increase the $250 statutory maximum for license renewal and initial license fees. Working with stakeholders and the chair of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, the CBA was successful at creating a new fee structure for initial licensure and license renewal. Specifically, a minimum fee level of $250 was placed in statute, and the statutory maximum was increased from $250 to $280. This meant that effective January 1, 2020, the fee to be charged for license renewal and initial licensure was $250. Although the $250 level created a significant increase in revenue, the CBA's authorized expenditures continued to outpace revenues. As a result, the CBA continued pursuing a regulatory fee increase to the new statutory maximum of $280, and this was approved and it became effective on October 1st of 2022. I'd like to state that although there has been fluctuation in fee levels, the initial license and license renewal fee overall has only increased by $80 since 2000, when the fee was $200, and today as the fee is $280. Switching gears to the fee analysis, as part of the Sunset Review hearings in 2019, which ultimately led to the legislation to increase the initial license and license renewal fee that I just mentioned, it was agreed that the CBA would conduct a fee analysis. Based on the outcome of this analysis, the CBA could take steps, if necessary, to pursue changes to its fee structure. The CBA entered into 2 agreements with a contractor to conduct the fee analysis. The contractor compiled significant workload data and developed methodologies that formed a basic framework for a fee analysis. The preliminary work completed by the contractor was transitioned to the DCA budget office. The primary reason for the transition was to ensure that any outcomes for a fee analysis included future workload and revenue needs. And since DCA Budget Office has extensive knowledge in this area, it agreed to take the preliminary work completed by the contractor and produce the CBA fee analysis. So the next item is the presentation of the fee analysis, which will be provided by Matt Nishimi from the DCA Budget Office. But before he provides his presentation, I just wanted to answer any questions that any members may have.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Any questions from the board? Ms. Ward?
I do have a question. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to ask, but the statutory limit you said is at $280. And I did look at the information regarding, I think, the 2 proposals, but I'm just wondering why is it so low? Like I would suggest making $700 or something most definitely higher, so you have that wiggle room to go up and down and not have to come back.
May I respond? So when we were going through the Sunset Review process, we initially we proposed a higher statutory limit, and it was really came down to the 280 level as more as working with stakeholders and the legislature. That's kind of what was agreed upon. And the primary reason was so that we could go out and do the fee analysis and then come back, and if the fee analysis reflected that we needed a higher level, we could come back at a future time and request that increase in the statutory level. But it was really at that time kind of a negotiation point. We started higher and we settled on the $280 level, working with the various stakeholders and legislators.
So was it a concern that if you placed it too high, that you would maybe one day ask for that fee, and that's why they didn't say yes to something higher? I'm just curious. I'm just wondering. Like for hygiene, it's set pretty high. Yeah. We don't plan to reach that number hopefully one day, but it's set that high. That way the board doesn't have to revisit it.
I think that may have been one of the concerns. I mean, there's optics. Our statutory limit at that time was 250, so just doing all of a sudden an increase to 700 obviously would give the appearance that we would potentially, do a regulation to increase the fee to a significantly higher level. But I do believe it was a couple of reasons. One, they did the statutory change to create the floor level at 250 so that we could get that influx in revenue sooner than later. That went into effect January 1, 2020. And then really from the legislative perspective, it was to get us to get that fee analysis in place. So that way when we were identifying a future statutory maxima, it was based on some data, some methodologies, and we weren't just picking a number. So that's at least from my perspective how it transpired.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll go into item 8B, number 2, and we have a presenter by Matt Nishimi. Are you ready to go?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Matt Nishimini. and I am in the budget office, and I'm also housed in the legal affairs division. I provide economic and fiscal analysis for all the regulatory packages moving through the department, and I also help to coordinate the fund condition reporting that we provide to the legislature and to the administration on a quarterly basis. I've been on and around DCA for the past 10 years and have been involved either directly or consulted on most every fee study, whether it was regulatory or statutory, since that time, the last 10 years. So I want to first thank the board staff and the management for all of their contributions on this fee analysis. We certainly couldn't have done it without their assistance. The report begins on page 136 of your meeting packet materials. And I'll just start going through them. And we're going to talk about the purpose and the methodology, the data inputs, the data integrity, the process steps, some observations, and some outcomes. And as we're going through this analysis, if any of you board members have questions, please interrupt me, or you can certainly save them to the end. And so let's begin. Actually, but before I do jump into this, I want to just say that what we did not do is we did not analyze any operational efficiencies or potential operational efficiencies. That wasn't the assignment here. And we also are not providing any recommendations here. This is a purely mathematical exercise to identify the cost inputs for the various fee types that we analyzed. And we're going to leave policy and the operational decisions to you board members and to board staff. So beginning on page 137 of the board meeting materials, we have the various fees that we identified. So initial exam, application, certification, request, renewal, so on and so forth. Renewal licensure, that's the big one that you all know is the largest revenue driver. Moving to the next page, we have the background and purpose. So on page 138, the objective of this study was to identify the actual cost inputs, the actual costs that the board is incurring to issue these licenses, and so that you could recover those costs. And so there were some comments about how the 280 was set previously by the legislature. And we came in to really flesh that out to determine what the actual costs are so that in the future, the board could seek a legislative change to establish those fees at the right level. Let's see here. So we examined, as part of the scope, we started with the historical actual expenditures and the budgeted expenditures. So we compared that. We examined the current expenditures and revenues, and then we projected future expenditures, right? So that we're forward thinking. And we did that out to the end of the decade. We also looked at the staffing levels, right? Historical, current, and future possible staffing levels. Then what we did was we determined and we calculated the full direct and indirect costs to sustain the board. And we did that not only on the high board level, but per application or registration type. So looking at page 139 of the meeting materials, this is a driver-based cost model, right? It's direct costs plus indirect costs should equal your full cost recovery. And this is based upon the board's full appropriation level, fully expending. So these direct costs are going to include personal services costs for staff, workload tasks, timeframes, activities, and actual benefits, projected personal services costs. Indirect costs would include management oversight, enforcement-related activities, including Attorney General, Office of Administrative Hearings, and other administrative functions, operating expenses and equipment, department distributed admin, as well as statewide distributed admin, and other agency costs and contracts. Again, it's the full allocated budget. So this study is also, I would note, is based upon the 2023-24 governor's budget. And then what we did was we took that and because this was a point in time, the 24, and then we're forecasting out. So we started with a baseline budget of 23-24, and then we built that on known incremental increases, typical historical incremental increases that we know programs receive, and we built it out, the model out for future projections. Some of the observations on page 141, a couple of things of note. One is that this board has historically reverted savings, did not fully expend its appropriation. But as Mr. Rosenbaum noted on page 126 of his report, the fiscal month 3 expenditure report is showing that the board is now more fully expending its appropriation levels. And we would anticipate that moving forward. So you're going to have less cost savings, particularly as you ramp up the business modernization project. You procure the IT system, you implement it. The first 3 years are typically the highest in cost, and then those costs are going to reset at a lower level when it goes into the maintenance and operation phases. So the board, I'd also note that the board has not requested additional funding for the BMP at this time, which means that you're going to have to redirect some of those savings that you may have had in the past or from other high priority areas to fund the BMP IT project as currently projected. Now, to the extent that you're no longer able to, the board may need to seek additional resources through the annual budget process, through the BCP process. The second thing to note was COVID-19. So COVID-19 had a direct impact on all state agencies. So the governor implemented operational and personal services cuts. So there were furloughs and there were 5% cuts to OE&E. So that artificially reduced your 2021 or 2020, 21, and 21-22 budgets, artificially reduced them. Otherwise, we may have been having this conversation previously. And then the last one of note is that BMP project, the Business Modernization Project. As I noted, we're currently not requesting additional resources, but and redirecting savings for these purposes. But I would note, so the board does typically have Attorney General savings. Those dollars cannot be redirected for those purposes. Those are dedicated purposes. Other things, other contracts, personal services costs, other OE&E line items, those savings line items can be redirected, but Attorney General and Office of Administrative Hearings cannot. If we move down to page 142 of your board meeting materials, these were the steps we went through. So again, we collected data. We have access, all the historical data, revenue, expenditures, staffing data. We identified the personnel. We identified their actual salaries. Rather than just going off of a projected salary, we used actuals. We identified the direct processes and activities to perform these licensing activities. We collected application revenue. We know what the actual application volume has been historically and is currently, and we projected out. We identified all other non-personal services costs, contract costs, admin, AG, enforcement, etc. And then based on that data, then we were able to build the cost structure. We calculated the direct and indirect costs based on those hourly timeframes, those workload timeframes, plus the cost inputs. We were able to identify the costs per application and registration type. And then we also performed quality assurance by verifying that the hourly workload matched to what the actuals are and what the projected budgeted amounts are. And then we made sure that the revenues that are to be collected are commensurate with your full expenditures. So that would be your expenditures plus any other outlays, for example, statewide pro rata, because you're paying for those right off the top. That's a direct draw to your fund. So on page 143, again, those are the fees that we looked at. And then I want to focus in on page 144. So this is the fund conditions statement. This would be your, based upon the 2023-24 governor's budget status quo, which was released just earlier this month. This one's a little different though, right? Because we go out to the rest of the decade. So you typically see 3 years, prior year, current year, and budget year. This is going out so you can forecast it. As noted in Mr. Rosenbaum's report, there's the 10 million general fund loan being repaid. I'd note there is no reporting of interest income at this time because we're not exactly sure when that 10 million is going to be returned, and it's accrued on a monthly basis. That interest income is accrued on a monthly basis. So since we don't know, we didn't post it, but we're assuming that that loan is going to be repaid towards the end of the year, maybe in June or May, and we're estimating about 100,000, 102,000 in interest income, which isn't identified in this fund condition statement. Looking at the bottom, the months in reserve, the highlighted blue, we're noticing that we are declining. Months in reserve are declining. So you are structurally imbalanced, which you all know, with revenues less than expenditures. This is showing that you will not be insolvent until the 2029-30 fiscal year, but it could be earlier, right? It could be earlier in the event that unanticipated costs increase the estimated projected expenditures that we have here. So at the end of the budget year, you have 10 months in reserve, which is, so when I characterize reserve balances, each board has its own threshold and policy comfort level with months of reserve. You have a 24-month statutory cap. So 10 months is on the lower end or lower medium end of that. And, but that's a policy decision that you board members would want to make on what you want to set that reserve balance at or target at. Let's see here. Oh, I'd also note just above that, a couple of lines above the blue line, we have total expenditures. So this includes the projected board's costs, that's the 1111 DCA line, the 19 million and moving forward, or 18.763 in the budget year. That 390, that's a supplemental payment pension, that's going to drop off. That 390, that's going to drop off, scheduled to drop off after the 24-25 year. And then we have statewide pro rata, which is about $1 million. So total outlay in the budget year 23-24 is a little over 20 million, but we see that growing quickly to 21 million or more. So on the next page, 145, this is sort of the nuts and bolts of it, right? So we have three different columns that are, well, we have more than three columns, but the three columns we want to focus on are the actual costs. So for exam initial application, that first one, actual costs were $173 for the board to issue that application. But you're only recovering $100. So you're operating at a deficit there. Likewise, most of the fees you'll see are you're collecting less than the amount that it costs for that fee type, which makes sense because you're structurally imbalanced. With the exception of the exam repeat, retired license is pretty close, but those are small revenue creators, drivers. You know, again, the largest one is the renewal. So we can see that based upon current fee levels, you're bringing in about 15.5 million, but our target is more like 21 million or 21 plus to ensure solvency, to eliminate the structural imbalance, and to the extent you board members want to build a fund balance reserve, then that is our target. Moving down to the next fund condition statement on page 146. So this is if we were to align the fees from the previous chart with the actual cost, this is what it would look like, highlighted orange. So you would be recovering the 21 related to those fees, plus there are some other fees and revenue sources that the board collects, which were not included in this fee analysis, which is, so it does bring you up to 25 million plus in total revenues. But the baseline are the fees that we identified. The other fees would include your initial application fees, which were not included in this analysis, but are tied through legislation statutorily to align with your renewal fees. Also, there's an exam undistributed payment from the NASBA that you guys also collect in revenues, but that is much more volatile because that's based upon individuals scheduled to take the exam and then don't show up. That money gets redirected back to the board. So that's why it's a little bit higher than the 21 million. There is a delta there. And then there's also delinquencies of about $470,000, which isn't included in the analysis, but we're adding it here because delinquencies are tied as a percentage to your renewals. And then some other accruals of about 200,000 are not included here. So that's the difference. That's about 3.1 million in the delta, if you're wondering. The next page, 147, next steps. So I would just reiterate that we're not providing a recommendation here. We're just providing it was just a mathematical exercise. We've identified the true costs that the board is incurring to issue these fee types, the fee types included in this report. I also note that the model and the fund condition statements have a 1/1/2024 effective date. So in just about a year, which would require legislative changes in this legislative session, which just began. And we've already, as part of those quarterly fund condition statements, we've already notified the administration and the legislature that this board may take possible actions to seek legislative changes. 148 again talks about our quality assurance. and again, goes over the data inputs. And then I'd like to look at some of these appendices beginning on 150. It's kind of interesting. So on page 150, these are the last prior 4 years. They're going to show your budgeted amounts and then your actual expenditures. And so you're seeing savings, which were reverted and stayed in the fund. But again, as we noted, those savings are less likely to occur in the future as you ramp up BizMod. And then the final appendix on page 151, that's going to show the direct and the indirect costs for each of the license types. And that's how we came to it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It's very informative. I've learned so much. Mr. Savoy has a question. I know.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern are loans. You know, when I joined the board 13 years ago, the general fund owed us $31,270,000, which has been paid back. You can see, looking at your analysis, maybe not your analysis, but this analysis, that we jumped from 5.3 months of reserve, and then once we get our 10 million back that was taken subsequently, we jump back to 11.5. I guess my biggest concern is with the fee increases, we're trending in a really good direction and have exceptional reserves, 13 months, 5 months, 15, 17, 18. I want to be sure that we don't keep increasing fees, which makes us a great candidate for the general fund to keep taking our money. You know, I know we have no protection over that, but I don't want the constituents and the people paying these fees to ever think that it is a tax because the general fund winds up taking our money. Now, we've come a long way in the 13 years that I've been here in getting our money paid back. And of course, you know, we're at the whims of the general fund taking money. But what can you say to that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question and those comments. So I would note that the $10 million, while it is loaned to the general fund, the overall calculation for your reserve balance, it is included. So even though we didn't identify it overtly because it wasn't in there, it still is in there. So you cannot exceed that 24-month cap. So that 24-month cap, if we had reported this 10 million for an accounting purposes earlier, and you were to exceed that 24-month cap because your fee amounts were too high, then you would have to make some sort of reduction in fee levels through the regulatory process. So that 24-month cap is never going to be exceeded. In other words, the general fund can't borrow money to lower you under that 24-month cap. So that would be one. The second thing is from an operational side and the way the law is written on these loans, and they're in the Budget Act, if the board needs the money for whatever reason, you can demand that money back. You can get that money back. So if you were going insolvent, if you had priorities, policy priorities, we would work with the Department of Finance to get that money back. But as you've noted, the administration has the ability to implement these loans. And we are all part of the administration, and we serve at the pleasure of the administration. I hope that clarifies it.
Ms. Pierce has something to say.
If I can just add on to that, I think that I hear you. And I think it's for this board, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, right now we're in a structural, imbalance. So we have to increase, we need to do something so that we're looking at, longevity in terms of balancing that out. And so I hear you in that you don't want to just, get a pool of money for them to dip from whenever they, whenever the need arises. But we also don't want to not have that pool of money in the event we need it for our resources going forward, for whatever those needs are. Enforcement cases, which can be small or big, business modernization, which, is usually always big, So I think that, I definitely hear you from a staff perspective in that, we don't want to just arbitrarily grow so that we're playing this take a loan, get it paid back thing. But I think from staff's perspective, what we're trying to do is come up with, a fair balance where we're recovering what, we're being assessed, we want to make sure we're balancing that out, not getting too much, but not shorting ourselves as well. And so I'm not sure, I mean, I can't make a commitment. I know Matt probably won't make a commitment that they won't take a loan from us in the future. But I think from a staff perspective that's kind of what we're trying to balance. And so I think that the fee level, the fee analysis, the levels that are identified in here and what we're going to talk about in the next agenda item, I think they do address, an issue that we're having with balancing that out. Whether or not it goes too far or not, I think that's a policy discussion of the board. But
And we can continue that discussion on the next item too. So keep that in mind. Any other comment or question for Matt here? No? Any public comment? Mr. Fox? No, just kidding. Any comment, moderator, can you open up for public comment on WebEx?
Certainly, and we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If you have any comment on the topic, you can look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment in the text box there and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please. And thank you again, Matt, for being here and providing us those numbers, as you said. All right, we're going to the next item, and that is item 8B3. And Deanna, do you want to do your overview?
yes, Mr. Savoy, I saw your hand go up. I didn't know if you had a question for. Oh, okay. Got him. So now that you've had a chance to hear an overview of the CBA's fee analysis, the next step is to discuss whether to approve fee level increases. So the CBA fee analysis discussed the fees identified on page 2 of the agenda item, and that chart includes the current fee level and the present statutory limit associated with each fee. Get my agenda item. The CBA is authorized to establish fee levels through regulation as long as it doesn't exceed the limits identified in statute. Fee changes where the fee is presently at the statutory limit will require legislation to increase the limit. Additionally, the CBA fee analysis identified the actual cost to perform the service associated with each of the fees. With the exception of the license renewal fee, the fee levels cannot exceed the actual cost to perform the services for which the fees are being assessed. Fee levels may be set at a lower amount as a policy decision. As identified in the fee analysis, the CBA is not collecting fees at the appropriate level to cover the cost of performing specified services. This impacts the CBA's revenues as they are not adequately covering the authorized expenditures. As stated on page 3 of in the chart, the CBA's primary revenue source is funds collected from license renewal fees. So there are 2 scenarios of statutory and regulatory changes for the CBA to consider. Scenario 1 is based solely on the outcomes from the CBA fee analysis, whereas Scenario 2 is based in part on the outcomes of the CBA fee analysis, but also considers current impacts facing the CPA candidate pipeline. As identified, both scenarios generate increased revenue to cover authorized expenditures and secure sufficient funds for future CPA operations. Starting with Scenario 1, this scenario reflects necessary fee level changes to align with the actual cost of performing the associated service. The overall impact of the reflected fee changes is a significant increase to the CBA's annual revenue. The proposed fee changes and corresponding projected revenue of the increases are reflected in the table on page 4 of the agenda item, and they are highlighted in green. The only fees that would not be impacted are the repeat examination and retired licensure fee under this scenario. Further, the CBA would generate approximately $21.5 million annually, and the fund condition statement related to this scenario is included as attachment 2. Moving to Scenario 2, this scenario proposes a different fee level structure that provides a similar outcome of increased revenue, but takes into consideration entry into the CPA profession. A chart of the fee levels for Scenario 2 is on page 6 of the agenda item, and the fee levels and associated revenue are highlighted in blue. Specifically, Scenario 2 proposes that key fee levels related to entry into the CPA profession remain at existing levels. Those would include examination and CPA application review fees. Further, the fee associated with reviewing an application for an accountancy, partnership, or corporation would be increased above its current level, but less than what is identified in the CBA's fee analysis. The license renewal fee would be set at $400, which is slightly higher than what is referenced under Scenario 1. Under Scenario 2, the CBA would generate approximately $21.6 million in annual revenue, which is consistent with the projected revenue contained in Scenario 1. The fund condition statement associated with Scenario 2 is included as attachment 5. Once the CBA elects a fee level change scenario, a statutory change, regulatory change, or both will be required. And this is based, you can see the information based in attachment 7. If the CBA approves statutory changes, the next step is finding a legislator willing to carry the proposed legislation. If the CBA is successful at finding an author to carry a fee increase bill in 2023 and the bill is successful through the legislative process, the new statutory fees could be effective January 1, 2024. If the CBA is unable to find an author, the CBA can discuss next steps, including the possibility of whether the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee and Assembly Business and Professions Committee would consider including the statutory fee changes as part of the CBA's sunset review legislation. If a rulemaking is necessary, just timing on that, it can take up to 18 months or longer. The next step is for the CBA to discuss the information before them to determine which of the presented scenarios to consider pursuing. I would like to note that the attachments to this agenda item include the necessary proposed statutory and regulatory language. Additionally, for the statutory fee level changes, which are attachments 3 and 6, the language also includes a provision that essentially allows the CBA to increase future fees based on the Consumer Price Index at a specified period without undergoing the rulemaking process. The proposed language is based on legislation introduced by former Assembly Member Evan Lowe in 2019. Although the legislation was not successful, it does provide a reasonable concept that could be effective in enabling the CBA to implement fee increases in the future and possibly minimizing the number of future fee increases. Staff have conducted significant analysis on the current fee structure and possible increases and have taken into account the current issues facing the entry into the accounting profession. We're also aware of the current economic impacts that are present in the world today. Scenario 2 balances the interests of public protection and the CBA's financial obligation. It creates the additional revenue to ensure the CBA is covering its authorized expenditures today, yet provides growth and security for future needs while also maintaining fees at a reduced rate for those who are entering the practice of public accountancy without adding additional financial barriers. Based on this, staff recommends scenario 2 and motion 2 that approves the proposed amendments in attachment 6 to Business and Professions Code section 5134. And with that long-winded presentation, I'll turn it back over to Vice President Tu, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was not long-winded. Michael Savoy.
I forget who I am. First question is, you first presented that we're not allowed to charge fees in excess of costs. In scenario 2, although not significant, the renewal, it says it's at a cost of $343, yet we're proposing $400. So that's the first part. Now, I truly understand the need to get more entry-level people at a very reduced price, and the fact that the renewal represents almost 45,000 units, so to speak, so we're able to capture, over $2 million. So basically, the existing CPAs are subsidizing the newbies, so to speak. But one thing you should also point out is that renewal is every 2 years. So if you look at an annual basis, it's only half of this, where a lot of these other fees are the one-shot deals. So I think that should be noted. So I leave it at that. You can answer the first question and make comments on whatever else I said.
In regards to the first question, there's a provision in the statute that allows, it basically says it's the intent of the legislature that to ease entry into the practice of, to the public accounting profession, that any administrative costs to the board related to the exam or issuance of a CPA certificate that exceeds the fees authorized by that section can be covered by fees charged for the biannual renewal of the permit to practice. So that's why I said except for the license renewal fee, because we have a little bit of flexibility there. And you are right, the biannual renewal fee is that it's collected every 2 years. What we have identified here in the various fund conditions, it's showing the annual revenue. So it's, and not, it's not showing every 2 years, it's showing it kind of split in half, basically. So I hope that was responsive.
And I'm assuming people renew at different times, so therefore they kind of even out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ms. Ward?
Thank you. And I do agree with the fact that if a student is graduating, they're applying for a license to give them a break. They don't have any money per se. They're trying to get into the field. My question is for the corporation partnership application review. Is that someone that is new into the field or someone established? Because why is that one reduced so much?
So definitely this is up for, discussion and deliberation by the board, but I think in terms of the conceptual, entry into the practice, it's entry into, getting a firm license as well. So that's kind of what the thought process was, but that's certainly discussion by the board.
Any other, Ms.
So I'm sorry. So is that someone that is already practicing, like they can already be working for 10 years and they decide to go into this, or no?
Correct. It could be somebody newly licensed or with any amount of tenure of licensure who is then starting up an accounting firm, a partnership, or a corporation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tu. I realized I probably should have noted this in the previous agenda item, but I wanted to say that I think it would be useful in the reporting to have a dollar change and a percent change noted, because those are things that I will just manually calculate, and I think it's easier for us to respond with the fee analysis if we can actually see that calculated. So for future, I just wanted to request that. Also, in a previous presentation, he noted that there wasn't an analysis of operational efficiencies prepared. And I understand that wasn't part of his exercise, but if we're being asked today to choose a different scenario on the fees, I think that that's relevant in our decision, especially noting that some of these actual costs are far greater than the current fees. So while I understand we need to rectify the issue of our costs exceeding our revenues, I think that operational efficiency analysis is an important factor to the decision. So in my opinion, I feel like what we're asked to do today is a little premature without that missing information, but I understand that that's what we're being asked to do today, but just wanted to note that.
I just want to note that there is a staff scenario recommendation, but as a board, we don't have to follow that prescribed motion or anything like that. And I also wanted to clarify that the only one that you need to start legislative effort would be the CPA application renew, because everything else is under already under statutory, right?
Correct. We would, if under scenario 1, it would be a dual process of a statute and a regulation change. Under scenario 2, it would only be a statutory change. Yeah. And if I,
does that mean if it's on scenario 2, the discussion of the actual fees itself can still continue in future meetings?
So we're kind of up against a little bit of a time frame. The bill introduction deadline for the legislature is February 17th. So if the board wants to pursue legislation this year to initiate a fee increase, then it would be ideal to get an action out of this particular meeting so that we can start running in that direction.
Yeah, that's what I was clarifying. We can actually separate the two things if we need to.
And may, sure. If it's appropriate, may I just provide some additional information to Ms. Lotta regarding the operational efficiencies?
Absolutely.
Just in regards to that, I think and I don't want to put words in Mr. Nishimi's mouth, but I think what he's talking about is on an ongoing basis, we're always looking for operational efficiencies. And I think we've seen a lot, through the various business modernization processes. So I don't think he was saying that there are some that we haven't considered and didn't incorporate into the analysis. I think he's saying that we didn't stop, analyze all of our processes, identify new efficiencies, and then reevaluate the fee analyses. So we are constantly doing that with all areas of the board. Not to say that in the future there may not be future efficiencies that we can incorporate that may impact where we are, but the fee analysis is really kind of where we are today. And so I think if we were to want to examine, do a more formal examination of operational efficiencies and then take that into consideration and then redo a fee analysis, we're kind of putting it down the road a little bit, and then we have some financial things to consider as well.
Mr. Savoy?
I make a motion to accept staff's recommendation of scenario 2 and go through whatever legislative process is necessary to accomplish this.
And Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, and I will second that motion. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion from the board, Ms. Hines?
Just to clarify that motion, are we accepting the staff's proposed levels as well? Okay.
Okay. Any comments, further comments? We have public comment. So, Mr. Fox?
Jason Fox with the California Society of CPAs. So first, no formal position from our standpoint. Certainly wanted to hear the conversation with this group, but just want to kind of highlight a couple points for consideration as this moves forward, and certainly have to have a conversation with staff as this moves forward. So historically, CalCPA, we've supported an adequately resourced board of accounting. That's important for the profession. And certainly understand the need for stability with having the fees. There's been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of issues outside the Board of Accountants' control that have impacted that. I think the fee analysis is certainly an important data point to help kind of inform some of that. And I do think the staff recommendation of holding the entry-level thing is worth consideration, from a pipeline entrance to the profession standpoint. However, I will note that there is going to be significant price sensitivity from a number of licensees that will take a look at their renewal and have some questions. You know, and I certainly I think the legislative, you know, will have some thoughts too related to the fees, and I know the board staff's thought about that. I think what might highlight that kind of price sensitivity point is kind of the way that the big jump, and I understand that might be necessary to get you to where you need to be as quickly as possible. And so I don't know if there's consideration of maybe kind of approaching it from a tiered kind of rollout approach, so it's more of a slower increase. I don't know. I mean, you know, that might be something that the board staff and working with DCA and their team look at how that gets you to where you need to be in the time frame. It certainly be slower, but I do wonder if that's a consideration to, you know, think about, to kind of allow people to get there without having to do a big jump, almost, you know, twice the increase, at least on the renewal side, particularly on that scenario too. And then I do think there is merit to kind of address this problem going forward, to kind of tie it into that kind of the consumer price index. So there's, you know, the board would certainly have control, but then there is that kind of keeping up with the times, as opposed to having these hard conversations every, you know, I don't know, 5, 10 years or whatever it might be. So just food for thought to think about, and certainly we'll engage with the conversation as it moves forward.
All right. Thank you again for that comment and that input. Any further discussion from the board members? Seeing none. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm in the public comment stage right now. A moderator, can you open up WebEx for any comment?
Certainly, and we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. You can click on the question mark, typically at the lower right of your WebEx screen, type the word comment into the text box and click send. Anyone may also raise their hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may, call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes. And I do not see any request for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you so much. And Ms. Reed, can you call the vote?
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Yen Tu,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
and Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Now it's a little after 12. I would like to do a lunch break and be back by 1 o'clock. Thank you so much.